I almost didn't tell her the truth that night. I'd kept it locked up for 3 years, the kind of thing you bury so deep you start believing it never happened at all. But when she said those words to me, quiet and flat, like she'd already accepted them as fact, something in me refused to let her keep believing it. I didn't know yet that answering her honestly would be the bravest thing I'd done since the accident that took my brother. But some truths only surface when somebody else needs them more than you need your own silence. My name is Nathaniel Hollis, though everyone in Winnequi just calls me Nate. I'm 34, and I run a small business fixing up lake cabins along the shoreline of Lake Winnequi, Maine, repairing docks, rebuilding porches, patching roofs before the first snow. It's steady work, the kind that keeps a man's hands busy and his mind quiet, which is exactly what I needed after my younger brother Danny died in a boating accident 4 years ago, one I was driving the boat for. Nobody in town ever blamed me out loud. They didn't have to. I did enough of that on my own. Since then, I've kept to myself, fixed what needed fixing, and let the lake do most of my talking for me. Sarah Kessler moved into the old Whitfield cottage at the far end of the lake road that spring, the one that had sat empty for 2 winters after old Mrs. Whitfield passed. I met her the way most people in Winnequi meet their neighbors, by fixing something that had broken before they'd even unpacked their boxes. Her front porch step had rotted clean through, and she'd nearly gone down it the first morning she tried to carry groceries inside. "You must be the handyman everyone mentioned," she said, holding a bag of groceries against her hip while I knelt down to check the damage. Her voice was careful, guarded in a way that made me look up twice. "Nate Hollis," I said. "And this step's been rotting since before you got here. Not your fault." She gave a small, tired laugh like she'd expected to be blamed for it anyway. "People around here seem eager to find fault with things," she said, then caught herself, like she'd said more than she meant to. "I didn't push. I just measured the board, told her I'd be back Thursday with lumber, and left it at that." She thanked me twice on my way out, more than the job called for, like gratitude was something she wasn't used to receiving without a price attached. Thursday came, and I brought my toolbox and enough cedar planks to replace the whole porch, not just the step. She came out while I worked, sat on the railing with a mug of coffee, and watched in a way that told me she didn't have anywhere pressing to be. I learned in pieces, the way you learn anything from someone still deciding whether to trust you. She'd worked as a bookkeeper in Portland before moving here. She didn't mention why she'd left, only that she needed a fresh start somewhere quiet. She flinched slightly whenever my truck radio picked up a news station, reaching over fast to change it, like she was afraid of what might come on. "You always this jumpy around the radio?" I asked once, half teasing. Her face closed up fast. "Just don't care for the news," she said, and turned back to her coffee like the conversation was finished. I filed that away with the rest of the things she wasn't saying, and I didn't ask again. Some people carry weight you don't get handed all at once. You wait for them to set pieces of it down themselves. Over the following weeks, I found more reasons to drive out to the Whitfield cottage than the job strictly required. A loose gutter, a drafty window, a wood stove that needed cleaning before the cold set in properly. Sarah always had coffee ready, and slowly, the guarded quiet between us loosened into something easier. She had a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard the first few times, a habit of narrating her own mistakes out loud, like she was daring herself to laugh instead of hide. "I burned the eggs again," she told me one morning, holding up a blackened pan like evidence in a trial. "I promise I used to be capable of feeding myself." "Used to be," I repeated. "What happened?" Something flickered behind her eyes, there and gone so fast I almost missed it. "Life happened," she said simply, and changed the subject before I could follow it further. A week after the porch repair, she asked if I wanted to stay for dinner once I'd finished patching a leak in her roof, insisting she at least owed me a decent meal after so many house calls. We ate at her small kitchen table, the lake visible through the window behind her, and she told me about growing up in a mill town 2 hours north, the daughter of a single mother who cleaned houses for a living. "I used to think numbers were the one thing that couldn't lie to you," she said, twirling her fork. "Guess I learned the hard way that people attached to those numbers could lie plenty." I didn't ask her to explain further that night. I just listened, And something about the way she talked, careful but never dishonest, made me want to keep listening for a long time after that first dinner ended. It was a Tuesday in early June when Sarah applied for a job at the general store in town, the one place hiring that season besides the seasonal marina work that dried up every October. I found out about it the way most things in Winnicke get found out, over coffee at the diner, where Ellen Marsh, who ran the store, was telling anyone who'd listen that she wasn't about to hire that Kessler woman after what she'd read online. "Read what?" I asked, setting my mug down harder than I meant to. Ellen looked at me like I'd asked something obvious. "You don't know?" "She did time, Nate. 18 months, upstate fraud," I heard. "Some scheme with a boyfriend, cooking the books at some company in Portland." She said it with the particular relish some people save for other people's ruin. I'm not about to have someone with a record handling my till. I drove straight to the Whitfield cottage after that, not sure what I meant to say. Only that I needed to hear it from her, and not from Ellen Marsh's version of events. Sarah was sitting on the porch step I'd rebuilt, staring out at the lake, when I pulled in. She looked up at my face and seemed to already know why I'd come. "Ellen told you," she said. It wasn't a question. "She told me a version," I said. "I'd rather hear yours." She was quiet a long moment, hands wrapped tight around her knees. "I dated a man named Curtis for almost 3 years," she finally said. "He ran a small investment firm, told me it was all legitimate, had me handling the books because he said he trusted me more than anyone else on staff. I didn't know, not at first, that he was moving client funds into accounts that didn't exist. By the time I figured it out, my name was already on half the paperwork he'd forged my signature onto, and the rest I'd signed myself without asking enough questions." Her voice cracked slightly. When it all came apart, he had a lawyer within a day. I had a public defender who told me taking a plea was safer than risking a jury, believing I'd known everything all along. So I took it. 18 months. Curtis served 4, called it a technicality, and started a new firm 2 towns over within a year. I sat down on the step beside her, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. "That's not the same as what people are saying in town," I said quietly. "It doesn't matter what actually happened," she said, bitterness threading through the exhaustion in her voice. "It matters what people decide to believe. And most people decide the shorter, uglier version is easier to remember." "I don't," I said. She looked at me, surprised by the certainty in my voice. "You don't know me well enough yet to decide that." "I know enough," I said. "I know you rebuilt a porch step's worth of trust with me one Thursday at a time instead of asking for it outright. That tells me plenty." Something in her face softened, just slightly, before she looked back out at the lake, like she needed somewhere safe to put the emotion crossing her features. That night, after leaving the Whitfield cottage, I sat on my own dock a long while, watching the water go dark and still, the way it always did after sunset. I thought about Danny, about the sound the boat's hull made the moment the wave hit us broadside, about how quiet the whole lake had gone afterward, like even the water was ashamed of what it had allowed. I hadn't talked about that day with anyone in years. Not really. Not past the bare facts everyone in town already assumed they knew. Something about Sarah's honesty that afternoon made me wonder, for the first time in a long while, whether carrying a story alone was really protecting anyone, or just keeping the wound from ever closing properly. The general store job never came through. Ellen hired someone else's daughter instead, someone with no history to whisper about. Sarah took it in stride outwardly, picking up odd cleaning jobs around the lake community instead. But I noticed the toll it took. The way she stopped making eye contact with people in town. The way she started timing her grocery runs for hours when the store would be emptiest. One afternoon in July, I found her sitting at her kitchen table, some printouts spread out in front of her, a phone pressed to her ear. I caught the tail end of the call before she hung up. "I understand," she was saying, voice tight and controlled. "Thank you for considering me." She set the phone down and stared at the table for a long moment. "Another no?" I asked from the doorway. "4th one this month," she said. "Background check comes back, and suddenly the position's been filled after all." She let out a short, humorless laugh. I did my time. I paid what they said I owed. And it's still not enough. I walked over, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down. You've got the skills for actual bookkeeping work. Real accounting, not just cleaning houses, I said. Why not start something of your own, out here on the lake? Half the cabin owners around here need someone honest handling their rental books and expenses. I'd trust you with mine before I'd trust half the accountants in this county. She looked at me like I'd offered her something she hadn't let herself imagine in years. You'd really trust me with your books? After what I just told you? I'd trust you more because you told me, I said. People who've got nothing to hide anymore tend to be the most careful with everyone else's. She was quiet a long moment, turning the idea over. I don't have the money for an office. I don't even have new client software. You've got a kitchen table, a phone, and word of mouth around a lake full of people who talk more than they should, I said. Start there. Let the work speak before the rumors get another chance to. Something shifted in her expression, hope creeping in past the caution she usually kept it locked behind. Okay, she said softly. I'll try. Over the following weeks, I watched her build something small but real. I put the word out among the cabin owners I worked for, careful never to say more than that she was skilled and honest, letting her prove the rest herself. Slowly, jobs trickled in. A rental owner needing help with seasonal tax paperwork. A retired couple needing their small trust fund tracked properly. Word moved the way it always does in a small town, quiet at first, then faster once the first satisfied client started talking. By late July, Sarah had picked up a rhythm to her days that hadn't existed when she first arrived, jumpy and guarded. She started walking down to the little dock behind her cottage most mornings with a cup of coffee, watching the mist lift off the water before her first client calls began. I found myself timing my own morning drives past her place a little slower, just to catch a wave through the window if she happened to look up. One Saturday, I helped her set up a small folding table at the farmer's market on the green, mostly so she could hand out business cards to people who might need bookkeeping help for the fall tax season. She was nervous the whole drive over, certain nobody would approach a table run by that Kessler woman, but Mrs. Aldis from the daycare 2 towns over stopped first, then the owner of the marina bait shop, then 2 cabin renters who'd heard about her work through Mr. Faraday. By early afternoon, she'd handed out nearly every card she'd printed. You didn't have to help me set up, she said, folding the table back into my truck bed. You've got your own work waiting. I like watching you convince this whole lake you're worth trusting, I said. Feels like decent use of a Saturday to me. She smiled. A real one, the kind that had gotten easier to earn the longer she stayed in Winnicky. I like that you keep showing up for the small things, she said. Nobody's done that for me in a long time. Get used to it, I said, and meant every word of it. Her first client was Mr. Faraday, the retired school teacher who owned 3 cabins along the North Shore. I'd mentioned to him, careful and casual, that Sarah had real bookkeeping experience and needed a chance to prove it. He hired her mostly as a favor to me, I suspected, though within a month he was telling anyone who'd listen that she'd found nearly $400 in overlooked expenses his previous accountant had missed for 2 years running. Word moved the way it always does in a small town, quiet at first, then faster once the first satisfied client started talking. One evening in August, after she'd finished a particularly long day balancing books for 3 different cabin owners, we sat on her rebuilt porch step with 2 glasses of iced tea, watching the sun drop behind the tree line across the lake. I forgot what it felt like, she said quietly, to be good at something people actually needed. You were always good at it, I said. You just needed somewhere that let you prove it without asking permission first. She looked over at me, something warm and searching in her expression. Why do you keep doing this? Standing up for me, vouching for me to people who'd rather believe the worst. I hesitated, because the honest answer went further than I'd planned to admit yet, because somewhere in the last few months, fixing your porch turned into something I looked forward to more than any other job on my list, I said. And because I know what it's like to carry something you didn't fully choose, and to have people decide who you are based on the worst day of your life, instead of every other day after it. The accident, she said softly. You've never told me the details. I hadn't planned to, not yet, but something about her honesty pulled the truth out of me the way a splinter finally works its way to the surface. My brother Danny drowned 4 years ago, I said. I was driving the boat. A wave came out of nowhere, and by the time I got him back to shore, it was too late. Nobody in town ever said it was my fault out loud, but I've heard it in every quiet conversation that stops when I walk into a room since. Sarah's eyes filled, and she reached over, resting her hand lightly over mine. That wasn't your fault, Nate. I know that. Some days, I said. Other days, I'm not so sure. Then we're both carrying things people decided about us without knowing the whole story, she said quietly. Seems that way, I agreed, and for the first time in years, saying it out loud didn't feel like reopening a wound. It felt like setting something down I'd been carrying alone far too long. One rainy evening in late July, before Curtis ever resurfaced, Sarah invited me in out of a sudden downpour that caught us both off guard while I was finishing a gutter repair. We sat by her wood stove, wet and laughing about how neither of us had thought to check the forecast, and for a while neither of us mentioned the rain outside at all. She told me about the version of herself she used to be before Curtis, ambitious and a little reckless. The kind of woman who trusted too fast because trusting slow had never occurred to her as necessary. I don't know if that woman's coming back, she admitted, but I think I like whoever I'm turning into out here better anyway. I think I like her too, I said, quieter than I meant to. She looked up at me, firelight catching the uncertainty and hope both fighting for space in her expression. For a moment, neither of us moved, the space between us thinner than it had been in months. Then my phone buzzed with a client call I couldn't ignore, and the moment slipped past before either of us had the courage to close that last small distance. I drove home that night, replaying it over and over, wondering how much longer I could keep pretending this was only about porch steps and gutters. By September, Curtis resurfaced. He showed up at Sarah's cottage on a gray Tuesday afternoon, driving a car too expensive for a man supposedly rebuilding his life after a fraud conviction. I was on the roof checking a chimney flashing when I heard his voice carry up from the driveway, smooth and practiced in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Sarah," he said, stepping out of the car like he owned the ground he stood on. "You look well. Small town living suits you." Sarah's whole body went rigid. "What do you want, Curtis?" "I heard you're doing some bookkeeping work out here," he said, glancing around at the modest cottage with barely concealed condescension. "Cute little operation. I could help you build it into something real, you know. My new firm's expanding. I could use someone with your particular set of skills, someone who already understands how to keep quiet books quiet." Something cold settled over Sarah's face. "I don't do that anymore." "Don't be naive," Curtis said, his voice hardening slightly. "You think anyone out here really trusts you? The moment something goes missing from one of these old ladies' retirement accounts, you know exactly who they'll blame first. Might as well make the accusation worth something." I climbed down from the roof at that, boots hitting the ground hard enough that Curtis finally noticed me standing there. "She said she's not interested," I said, stepping up beside Sarah. "I'd suggest you get back in that expensive car and drive back to wherever you came from." Curtis looked me over the way men like him always size up anyone standing between them and what they want. "And who exactly are you?" "The man who actually reads the books she keeps," I said. "Every entry. Every receipt. You'd know that if you'd bothered checking before showing up here trying to drag her back into whatever you're running now." Curtis's smile thinned into something uglier. "She's got a record, friend, one phone call from me to the wrong person. And every client she's got dries up overnight. People don't forgive easily around folks like her. Try it," I said evenly. "And I'll make sure every one of her clients hears exactly whose signature was forged and whose wasn't. Straight from the court records." "See how fast your new firm survives that conversation." Something flickered across Curtis's face, calculation shifting into caution. He glanced at Sarah one last time, forced his smile back into place, and said, "Think about my offer, Sarah. The door's open if this little experiment doesn't work out." He got back in his car and drove off, gravel spitting under the tires. Sarah stood frozen beside me, arms wrapped tight around herself. He's not going to leave it alone, she said quietly. He never does when he thinks there's still something to gain. Then we make sure there's nothing left for him to gain, I said. You've built something honest out here. That's worth protecting. Ellen Marsh wasn't finished either. She started telling customers at the store that Sarah's business partner had been seen driving through town twice that week, embellishing details until the story sounded less like a coincidence and more like a conspiracy. By the time it reached the marina office, one of Sarah's steadier clients had already called to say he'd just prefer to keep things simple and wouldn't be needing her services after all. After Curtis left that day, I drove into Portland the following morning and spent an hour at the courthouse records office, pulling whatever public documents existed from Sarah's original case. An old friend from high school, Marcus Duvall, worked as a paralegal there and helped me find the sentencing transcript. The one that clearly laid out how the forged signatures had been traced back to Curtis's own home computer. How the judge herself had noted Sarah's plea seemed motivated more by fear and bad legal advice than genuine culpability. I made careful copies of everything, tucking them into a folder I kept in my truck. Unsure yet whether I'd ever need them, only certain I wanted the truth ready the moment anyone demanded it. The following weeks tested that resolve harder than either of us expected. A whispered rumor started circulating that Sarah had been seen meeting with her old business partner, twisted just enough by the time it reached Ellen Marsh's counter to sound like confirmation of exactly the accusations Curtis had threatened. 2 clients quietly stopped calling. One cabin owner asked, awkwardly, whether she'd mind if he had someone double-check her numbers, just as a formality. I watched the toll it took on her, the careful confidence she'd built over the summer folding back in on itself. One evening I found her at her kitchen table again, staring at a stack of unopened mail, one envelope from a law office she hadn't worked up the nerve to open. Maybe I should just leave, she said quietly. Move somewhere nobody's heard the rumor yet. It always catches up eventually. Might as well save everyone the trouble of finding out. That's exhaustion talking, I said. Not the truth. How would you know? She snapped, then immediately looked stricken by her own sharpness. I'm sorry. I just don't know how many more towns I have left in me before I stop trying to prove I'm not the worst thing anyone's ever heard about me. I sat down across from her, close enough that our knees nearly touched. You don't have to keep proving it alone, I said. I know you're used to carrying this by yourself, packing up and starting over the second things get hard. But you're not the only one standing here anymore. Her breath caught. Why do you keep saying things like that, Nate? Because somewhere between fixing that porch step and watching you build an entire business out of a kitchen table, you stopped feeling like my neighbor, I said quietly. You started feeling like the reason I actually look forward to driving out to this end of the lake. Tears welled in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall yet. I can't ask you to fight rumors that follow me everywhere I go. You're not asking, I said. I'm choosing to. The night before the town meeting, I sat at my own kitchen table with the folder of court records spread out in front of me, rehearsing what I might say if the moment came. I hadn't spoken more than a few sentences at any town gathering in 4 years, not since people stopped expecting much conversation out of the man who'd lost his brother on the lake. But somewhere between the first porch step and every quiet evening since, I'd stopped caring more about my own comfortable silence than about the truth Sarah deserved spoken out loud. The town meeting happened almost by accident, a regular gathering at the community hall to discuss the marina's seasonal budget. But Ellen Marsh used the open floor time to bring up what she called concerns about certain new residents handling sensitive financial matters for our older community members. She didn't say Sarah's name directly, but everyone in the room knew exactly who she meant. Heads turning toward the back row where Sarah sat, spine straight despite the color draining from her face. I stood before Sarah had a chance to. I've got something to say, I said, and the room quieted. Half surprised that quiet Nate Hollis had anything to contribute to a marina budget meeting. Most of you know I lost my brother 4 years ago, I said. You know the rumors that followed me after that too, the ones nobody said to my face but everyone whispered plenty behind my back. I know what it's like to have a town decide who you are based on your worst day instead of everything you've done since. I looked over at Sarah, whose eyes had gone wide and glassy, Sarah Kessler served her time for a crime her ex-partner orchestrated, and she got dragged into trying to survive him. Since she's been in Winnicky, she's kept honest books for 6 different cabin owners, every dollar accounted for, every receipt filed. I've checked her numbers myself, more than once, because I wanted to be sure before I ever vouched for her. She's not the story Ellen's implying. She's proof that people can rebuild something real, if this town lets them. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then old Mr. Faraday, who owned 3 cabins along the North Shore and had been one of Sarah's first clients, stood up. "She's done more honest work for me this year than my last accountant did in 5, he said gruffly. "I don't much care what happened before she got here." A few other cabin owners murmured agreement. Ellen Marsh's face went red, and she sat back down without another word, the momentum of her accusation deflating in real time. After the meeting, Sarah found me outside in the parking lot, the autumn air sharp and cold around us. "You didn't have to do that," she said, voice thick. "I know," I said. "I wanted to." She stepped closer, close enough that I could see every emotion crossing her face at once. Disbelief and gratitude, and something warmer underneath both. "No one wants a woman with my past," she said quietly, like she was testing the words one more time, bracing for them to still be true even now. I reached out and gently tilted her chin up so she was looking at me instead of the ground. "Then they never knew you," I said, "because everything I've watched you build since that first Thursday, the honesty, the courage, the way you kept showing up even when this whole town gave you every reason to leave, that's exactly the kind of woman worth wanting. Your past isn't the whole story, Sarah. It's just the chapter that led you here." Her breath caught, tears finally spilling over. "You really mean that?" "Every word," I said. "I don't want the version of you everyone else decided to believe. I want the one standing in front of me right now." She let out a shaking laugh, half sob, half disbelief, and closed the distance between us, kissing me right there in the community hall parking lot, slow and certain, like something that had been building quietly all summer, had finally found its footing. "Okay," she whispered against my mouth. "Then let them talk. I've got better company to keep." 6 months later, Sarah's bookkeeping business had grown enough that she'd taken on a small office above the marina store, the same store that had once refused to hire her. She'd hung a small hand-painted sign in the window, "Kessler Ledger Services, honest books for honest people," a line she'd written herself and refused to change no matter how many times I teased her about how blunt it sounded. Mr. Faraday still stopped by weekly, less for accounting help these days than for the coffee she kept brewing for anyone who walked through her door. Ellen Marsh, to her credit, had eventually apologized, quiet and awkward, after watching half the lake community entrust their finances to the woman she'd once tried to run out of town. Curtis never returned after that autumn confrontation, his new firm folding under its own weight within the year. Exactly the kind of quiet justice neither of us needed to chase down ourselves. Danny's old fishing rod still hung above my workbench, the one thing I'd kept untouched since the accident, unable to either use it again or let it go. One evening that winter, Sarah found me standing in front of it. Quiet in a way she'd learned to recognize as more than simple tiredness. She didn't ask me to explain. She just stood beside me a long while, her hand slipping into mine, until the weight of it felt a little more bearable than it had carrying it alone for 4 years. "You don't have to fix everything about that day," she said softly. "Some things you just learn to carry differently." "I know that now," I said. Took someone showing me first, though. Some evenings, we sat on that same rebuilt porch step, watching the lake turn gold and then gray as the sun dropped behind the tree line. I thought back often to that gray Tuesday I'd first knelt down to check a rotting board, never expecting the woman standing above me would end up rebuilding parts of me I hadn't realized needed fixing too. I used to believe Winnicky would only ever know me as the man who lost his brother on that lake, that some reputations just settle in for good, the way silt settles at the bottom of still water. But Sarah had walked into that stillness with her own quiet courage and stirred something loose in both of us. Proof that people can be more than the worst thing anyone ever whispered about them. if somebody's willing to stand up and say so. Sometimes people ask how we started, a lake cabin repairman and a woman with a record nobody in town wanted to look past. I tell them it started with a broken porch step and a lot of unanswered questions, and it became something neither of us expected. Because sometimes the people worth building a life with aren't the ones without a past. They're the ones who show you exactly what they carried to get here and let you decide to stay anyway.